Thank you so much for your introduction, and thank you to your team for inviting me. I must admit, I've had some moments of severe doubt since I said yes, but I am happy to be with you virtually. I just wish it were in person. It's not the same to see small squares as it is to be with you in a room, but it's our reality at this time. So thank you. Today I'm going to try to use a PowerPoint, so we will mostly be looking at that together, and let me make sure that I can share it before I begin. As Kathy has explained, this is our theme, and I would like to start from the perspective of remembering. It's what we're called to do in Lent, and not always comfortable to remember. But I think down through our history as an institute, there are so many good things, good moments, and the journey to remember that started with our foundation day. And I think many of those moments are captured in some of our documents and some of what we have said. And those were, some of those key moments in the history of our institute up till the 2013 chapter. And I think always in each of those chapters, there was a remembering and an affirmation of values that have become and remained very important down through those years. I'm especially reminded of the call to justice in 1975. Remember the reasons for your hope is also important, that we're not looking just at the past, just at the present, but we're looking at the horizon of hope in the future, beyond this moment, beyond the challenging time of COVID and social distancing, of lockdown, of diminished energies and diminished numbers, but in some way retaining and nurturing that vision is important, whether as a congregation or as the United Nations. And I think, our theme today brings that together very beautifully in terms of we are remembering, we want to reveal the tenderness of God as we seek to respond to the cries of the earth and the cries of those on the margins. And I think, in the UN's remembering, this year was or I should say 2020, last year, was the 75th anniversary. And it was a time of remembering what the UN declared in the beginning in its founding document, the Charter, we the peoples. And it was coming out of the crisis of the Second World War, out of global suffering, global division. And here they were able to say, we, the peoples of these United Nations, have resolved to combine our efforts, and we hereby establish an organization to be known as the United Nations. So that remembering, I think, in the UN Charter is very much in line with values that are important to us as RSHM, human rights, peace, development. And as has been said very beautifully by both Kathleen and Kathy, 6 years ago, I've been remembering my time. And I had almost forgotten that the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals were not yet in place. They were almost there. They were still being negotiated. And how important that those months following my time with you in February 2015, how important they were. I think at that time, you know, just to be in touch with what this really meant and means for the world. I was at a UN event just before the lockdown and before we couldn't get in the door to be present physically, when one of the more senior speakers from government, I think it was, or a retired member of the UN staff, I can't remember, got up and said, you know, he said, we, for the very first time in human history, the world has a shared global agenda. That's quite astonishing when you think of it, for which all countries are aligned. It was agreed in the 1st or 2nd of August of that same year. And then finally the gavel passed in September, 193 member states saying, yes, this is our vision of the world in 2030. How important that was. And some of the phrases that appear, it's like there's a vision statement. It's like our chapter, a vision statement. You know, in our 2019 chapter document, we express that beautiful phrase that's part of our theme today. The United Nations said, we are resolved to free the human race from the tyranny of poverty. We want to heal and secure our planet. And then later on, they go on to say, as we embark on this collective journey, we pledge no one will be left behind. Oh my goodness, if only that could be true. We will endeavor to reach the furthest behind first. What a radical statement. And we affirm that planet Earth and its ecosystems are our common home. No, that's not Laudato Si. Laudato Si influenced that statement, thanks to the co-chairs suggesting it in their final month of negotiations as very helpful reading to do. And so I think today, as we look at those sustainable development goals and we say, you know, what are they? I think what's really important is that, you know, they are aspirational, they're ambitious, and yet at the same time, they're very practical. They have targets and they have indicators by which we can measure the progress or the lack of it. They are universal. Millennium Development Goals were not. They were for them, for the developing countries. The Sustainable Development Goals are for everyone, no exceptions. They are interdependent, and as we're going to see in many slides, there are so many links between them. No poverty. If we really want to eliminate poverty, that means something about energy, about jobs, about justice, about agriculture. So they're all how we produce and how we consume. And they are grounded in human rights, although there's only one that actually uses the word, and that is the right to clean water and sanitation. The human right to water is specifically mentioned. But just last week, Antonio Guterres underlined again the close link and the basis on which they are found is the Declaration of Human Rights. They are made specific, as I said, through an array of targets, 167 of them, and even more indicators. And they offer, and I think this is important because this is where we're at now, they offer a chance for accountability. Governments have said they will do this and work towards this. Have they actually done it? So at the core of this sustainable development agenda is a view of development which resonates with integral human development in Catholic social teaching and in pedagogy. So I'd like to just say a word about what the response has been from the member states of our world. How have they been implemented? Member states, I think, have taken them seriously for the most part. But responses vary very much. Some governments would be concentrating on some and really neglecting others. For example, the inequality one, SDG 10, is one that was very difficult to have as a goal. And yet we see how absolutely crucial it is in our world today that it needs to be addressed. The gaping chasms and chasms between different racial groups, different ethnic groups, and economic factors coming in. So the idea that there is an accountability is very important. And I share just an example. Every year in the last 5 years, there has been what has been called a high-level political forum. And that has meant that the member states come and report on what they've done and what they're doing. Now, just as children in a classroom are much more likely to report on all the good things they're doing, so the member states prefer to talk about what they are successful in. And often it is partners from civil society, faith-based groups, NGOs, who interject their word about ones that have not been taken so seriously. It's an opportunity, and all but, I think, about 10 countries have already done at least one what is called voluntary national report. And that is a very important self-evaluation that has been done by most countries. The United States, unfortunately, is not one of them. And along with Somalia, Haiti, and some small islands in the Pacific that are so small, the United States is one of the few that hasn't. One of the interesting things about them is the fact that many, many partnerships have come into existence. And I just show you one here, Alliance 8.7. And that is a partnership of member states, non-government organizations, some businesses, other international UN agencies, all around the target that has to do with one of the targets that has to do with slave labor and human trafficking. So that's an example of a partnership. More than 230 member organizations that are focusing on one target of one SDG in order to combine their energies in a very forceful way. So I just give you that as an interesting example. There are many partnerships. There are problems and there are challenges with the SDGs. We mustn't ignore them. Slow implementation. Some governments have, trailed their feet, especially with changes of administration, but not only for that. Siloed approach, where, people are working in their corner on one little thing, but it's not being linked to the others. The failure to address structural problems, I think it goes a lot, to the fact that, we're slow in the uptake on this. Lack of political will, very serious. And often it's so difficult, and many member states have not been successful in reaching the last first, which is what they committed to do. So the more remote, the more isolated, the more already unequal, the more marginalized, harder to reach them. Businesses are keen to have it in their reports. They quote what they are doing on the Sustainable Development Goals, but often investments are those that value profit rather than people. And there is a problem with following through on some of the commitments that were made in terms of financing. And then we have COVID. And as we can well imagine, COVID has had a huge impact. There are many issues that you deal with, I know, through ministry, such as migration. People on the move. They're not a goal. Migration is not a goal, but it's in the targets of many. And it relates to all of them. If we just look at education and health, we find interlinkages. And that's, I think it's true to say that at least 10 or 11 goals directly impact migrants. And migrants need to be fully included. We can just take two examples for the moment. In a recent progress report, I just share a couple of charts on reducing inequality within and among countries. It was falling, but unfortunately, 38 out of 84 countries, there was a 7-year period up till 3 years ago when income inequality was being reduced. Unfortunately, the pandemic has meant that the most vulnerable groups in the most vulnerable countries are most affected. And there has been and is likely to be more of a squeezing of development assistance to, or overseas development, official development assistance that is going to severely impact lower income countries where they have relied on remittances, where they have relied on official development assistance and can no longer do so. What about climate change and its impact? We're going to just show you some examples in a minute of images, but the global community has shied away from commitments required to reverse the climate crisis. The reality, unfortunately, we have seen expressed so much around us. And still, and this is very tragic, investment in fossil fuels continues to be higher than the investment in climate activities. So this goal has taken on an extreme importance. Water, just to take SDG 6, it's central to achieving almost all the Sustainable Development Goals. So before we move on to what I would like to do, which is to take the framework of see, judge, and act, and very quickly move through those three, I'd like to just show you a mini video if we can get it to work.
The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, are a series of goals that aim to end poverty, protect the planet, and improve the lives and prospects of everyone by 2030. But COVID-19 and its effects are a significant setback in progress towards these SDGs, and the most vulnerable are especially impacted. In 2015, the UN member states made it their mission to achieve peace and prosperity by 2030. To measure governments' progress towards this mission, they established 17 Sustainable Development Goals that each country was tasked to meet. But COVID-19 has presented a unique challenge in accomplishing several key SDGs. The goal most directly affected by COVID-19 is SDG 3, Good Health and Well-Being. Across the world, people are getting sick and dying from COVID-19. Because healthcare systems have been overwhelmed by the virus, they are unable to care for those with other illnesses as well. The pandemic has deprived children of their regular education, which impacts SDG 4 quality education and its end goal of helping people escape poverty. It is estimated that 90% of students worldwide are already out of school, and this has exacerbated the inequality between the richest and poorest students. In low-income countries, children of the richest 20% have a 79% education completion rate, while children of the poorest 20% have a 34% completion rate. It is also estimated that education online is out of reach for at least 500 million students worldwide. The UN created SDG 5, gender equality, to ensure it is treated as a human right and a necessary foundation for a better world. However, women are facing more consequences of the pandemic than men. The front lines of the pandemic are overwhelmingly female. Worldwide, 70% of all health and social workers are women, putting women directly in harm's way of the virus itself. Because of stay-at-home orders, women across the world are also being harmed more often by abusive partners. The virus has already done significant damage and will continue to do more if governments do not act swiftly to protect the most vulnerable. The UN acknowledges that the first priority must be for governments and healthcare systems to control the disease and mitigate as many of the impacts to the SDGs as possible. Governments must create a map to recovery from COVID-19 that ensures no one will be left behind.
And so, what about how do we listen? How do we see? How do we hear the cry of the earth and those on the margins? I was reminded of our visit in 2013 to a very beautiful park in Otim, where we were able to sit in a sort of a little amphitheater and listen to Mother Earth. Where do we see it? So I remember us sitting and listening. And it was the first time that for me, it was very clear that the earth is living. We have been listening to the cry of the earth in these last months in ways that we would never have imagined. As the number of extreme weather events have overtaken us, we might say. And we are very conscious that the earth is crying out. I think if we just take the climate for the moment, which, as Antonio Guterres says, is the epic issue really of our time. This is a striking illustration of how our carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have exceeded all boundaries within the last 50, 70 years. And in fact, half of what we've put up there has been within the last 20 years, since the beginning of the industrial age. And so much of that comes from burning fossil fuel. The average temperatures for that 5-year period, look at it, the red, practically all between 1980 and 2010, 2020. And so some of these are the earth crying out as earth ice sheets are melting at a rate that scientists' worst case scenarios did not predict. Ecological disasters displacing millions each year, from flooding, from drought, desertification, from cyclones, from hurricanes. And for you in California, how well you are aware of this and what tragic consequences the millions of hectares of forest destroyed each year. In the last 10 years alone, an area of of forest the size of United Kingdom, France, and Germany has been lost forever. Biodiversity loss, a mass extinction that could take decades to overcome. And yet, we are the earth, the people, plants, and animals, breath of life, forest, and flow of the sea. And so the cry of the people on the margins is linked to this. And I just share one or two memories of how that cry has reached us. These were the ones that I flashed through as I was speaking, showing you the change in the years were very extremely hot, the ice sheets melting, the disasters, and the fires in California, the biodiversity loss. And that brought me where I read the little saying that was on the tree, on the wall, and then to Brumadinho. Can you see Brumadinho?
Yes.
Okay, so the cry of the poor, the cry of those on the margins. I was telling you that this woman, we visited her house. We saw the destruction of the walls. The mud had flown down, I don't know how many kilometers, but a long distance. 272 people killed. Cry of those on the margins. 5 years after Mariana and the crime, the environmental crime there, the women meet and try to embroider their pain. Now, Helena, one of our sisters, works with them a bit. Amarco, the company, hills, people, river, shrimp, the flora, the fauna, happiness, joy, and dreams. The cry of those on the margins have sometimes been brought to the UN. And because, like the people of the Amazon, their situation, their closeness to creation, to the rainforest, and their failure to be treated as people. I had the privilege of translating for 2 of these as they shared at the UN their tragedy of being on the margins. This is the cry of those on the margins. And I think of all of you involved with so many people, especially in the issue of migration. I think of, as we look at this and we take Pope Francis's little book that I came across by chance, let us dream. Let us dream the path to a better future. How do we read the signs of our times in light of the gospel, our institute mission, and how do we choose life? And as I thought of this, a story came to me. And that story is from our institute, not right at the beginning, but in the 1880s, when the phylloxera, this terrible blight, came to the vineyards, not just of Béziers, but of southern France. It was a global crisis, and it led to a global shortage in wine. It affected Mother House. It affected our first communities. Little at that time did they know it was a global scourge. But Father Gaillac, writing to his niece in Liverpool, said, "We have never been so poor. Phylloxera, which is destroying all the vineyards, threatens us with extreme poverty, counting all other misfortunes, not counting all the other misfortunes, which may have and still befall us. Whatever happens, we are God's children. God put us to the test. God will never abandon us." And we see the financial report. 4 out of 5 years, deficit, 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 deficit. Yet what happened? He told them to go ahead and build something that was essential. And they went ahead and decided to take more orphans who wouldn't pay anything. Why? Because they were not stopped by crisis. They weren't energized by it, faith in action. And I think today, faced with the local, regional, and global crises linked to COVID, we are invited by our general chapter in 2019 to not only see, but also to choose. And in choosing, this is something that I think there's a huge resonance between what Pope Francis said in Laudato Si and what Antonio Guterres is saying today in terms of building back better from COVID, of dealing with the crises of the climate, the environment, everything, and poverty and increasing inequality this present time. The Sustainable Development Goals are a roadmap to new normal. And I think Pope Francis, in his little book, some of you may have read, I happened to see it in our library, and it became a guide for me as I tried to reflect in preparation for today. He has some beautiful phrases, and I will not be able to read what I was going to read to you because of time. He speaks about the fact, that the fate of creation is tied to the fate of all humanity. And we have become impatient with limits. In every COVID moment that stops us, and he shares on his own moments that were like COVID in his own life. Every COVID moment invites us to look again, to look at how we are relating to limits in our world. When we neglect Mother Earth, we have lost, we lose what we need to survive. We also lose the wisdom how to live well. We have to work within limits. We must redesign the economy so it offers every person access to a dignified existence while protecting and regenerating the natural world. So how we read the crises of today, and our response to them, I think is very interesting. On the left, we have the dicastery of the Vatican in promoting integral human development. If you take any one of those little boxes, sick, migrants, imprisoned, unemployed, victims of natural disaster, slavery and torture, we can see the intersections with all Sustainable Development Goals. So how we respond, I think we can be inspired by a Swedish Church of Sweden. A leader spoke at one of the events that I was at before doors were closed by COVID. He said, when we are discussing development policy or energy policy in any context, he said, it is the special responsibility of the churches to speak in favor of 3 non-participants in the meeting, whether it's at local level, the council level, the city level, the state, or the nation. Who are those 3? I'd like to introduce them. Those who are made poor and marginalized. Future generations. Non-human life. He said, we as church need to speak in favor of those 3 non-participants. And just to round out this section before we go to the last section of action, I'd like to quote Antonio Guterres, I think it was this last week. No, sorry, part of it he said in December and something else this last week. He said, we are fighting nature. We need to make peace with nature. This is the defining task of the 21st century. Strong words must be the top priority for everyone everywhere. There is no vaccine for our planet. Nature needs a bailout. There's no government going to give nature a bailout. In overcoming the pandemic, we can also avert climate cataclysm to restore our planet. I was going to play you a video, I won't, but I will give you the reference to it afterwards. I think this shows us very clearly that if COVID has taught us anything, it has shown us over these last nearly a year that it has everything is interconnected. Economic growth cannot protect humanity from crises. No one is safe until we're all safe. Vaccine nationalism is against everyone's health. And so at this critical moment, integral ecology takes us to the heart of this crisis, what we can do, what we are called to do. Because climate disruption and all the zoonotic diseases linked to it, it's a moral issue, life issue. I believe that as RSHM, we are particularly concerned that all may have life. So this is front and center. It is a part of our mission, I believe. I think I believe the Jesuits worked this out. We used it in the season of creation and back in September, October. I think it's a very helpful little circle, the pastoral circle, center of concern many years ago. It's adapted to see scientifically, evaluate ethically, reflect spiritually, act effectively. And what can we do? How can we respond? And I'm going to move very quickly, just sharing one simple example. Africa's Great Green Wall is an event that touched me. I just share it because we need signs of hope. Women from the Sahel, from Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso have been involved in this. 11 countries across the width of the Sahel in Africa. It is Great Green Wall of growth, newly planted life that is contributing to 15 of Sustainable Development Goals. Hundreds of thousands of people are going to benefit, some already are. And the climate itself will be helped because the idea is to stop the march of the desert down Africa. And through this, women are employed. Through this, the air is purified, more carbon dioxide is absorbed. How can we respond? We can respond by helping some of these creative projects like that. I think we can make connections. And I just mentioned very quickly, I shared at the enlarged leadership meeting, through our presence at the UN, we can make connections. And I just share pictures from the last ones that we were able to really share. And I believe that by doing that, thank you, Fide, you're there. I hope you see yourself. Pat, you're there. And how wonderful that we can use our participation, even if it's virtual, to bring voices from below, to bring the stories of people who are marginalized, and please do that, because we have and we will continue to do that, working with others. And I just, in the bottom left-hand corner, some people contributed to stories from below, the grassroots stories. And we will actually, on Monday, be launching that little booklet. And the stories are told of some of the people who've responded. Do that jointly. And the more you can channel information through me, it can help to, in some small way, make our presence a reality in the water world. Through speaking out, through statements. Right now, we have an opportunity. If you come across cases in Mexico, in California, of injustice linked to water, we have a wonderful relationship with the new special rapporteur. And he is looking for the stories from the ground, positive things that are being done, as well as the needs that need to be met. So the Sustainable Development Goals are a touchstone, and I will share the webpage with you for this, because for each goal, there's one practical idea that is referred to. Beautiful way, I think, of encouraging our engagement. There are choices that you and we are making in terms of investment choices. You know, many organizations, universities, religious congregations are divesting from fossil fuels, making a clear statement through that. Others are doing advocacy through the various shareholder organizations, and we have opportunities to do that. We have resources. Earthbeat has a wonderful See Judge Act during Lent. We have the programs through the Global Catholic Climate Movement. We have coalitions and collaborative interfaith groups. And I came across and have met them actually, but I just mentioned the Interfaith Power and Light group, which is based in California. And it takes the issue of energy, and it takes very seriously working together as a coalition on the energy issue in order to try to, as much as possible, make for a more sustainable sources of energy, divest from fossil fuels, and support renewables. We hope to strengthen global links and networks that enable us to make that spin in terms of implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. And I will actually share in the newsletter a few of these that might be of interest. So I have rushed a little bit this last part, but I want to be faithful to Kathy saying I could go till 5:02 and it's time. But as a world community, I think Pope Francis has summed up at the end of his action section. He mentions at the very end of this something I think is very important. And he says, we need to decenter and transcend. And I think what he means by that is decenter from our own little world into that broader world. What can help us to do that is often voice from the margins and move us out of our world and help us to transcend, to open windows and doors and move out beyond. He goes on to say, and much to my amusement, his very last sentence is, we need to, one of his last paragraphs is, as a world community, we must commit to meet United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And then he ends by saying, we need to decenter and transcend our own limited world, so that our peoples may have life. John 10:10. So I believe his word has a special message to us today. I apologize for going over the time and not being able to fully do justice to it, but share with you this thought and look forward to hearing yours. Thank you.
I think all of you agree with me that that was an amazing reflection on linking the SDGs with our vision as religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. And all I can say, Veronica, is thank you so much. And I'm so proud that you represent us at the United Nations. All right, we have 3 persons who will be responding after the break. And that is Maria Elena Perales, Barbara Casserly, and Mary Janino. And you're on, Maria Elena.
Thank you, Sister Kathy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to participate today and to respond to Sister Veronica's presentation. I would say Sister Veronica's challenge for all of us here today. I took it as a personal call for me in listening to Sister Veronica's presentation. She clearly articulated the pain and anguish we face in our common home today. I'm grateful for the update on the Sustainable Development Goals and to learn that Goal 3, 4, and 5 have been severely impacted by COVID. I've always known, or I've seen how COVID has impacted, but what she shared is very much touching me, and not only as a person who is involved in social justice, but also as a woman, as a mother, and as an immigrant. It reminds me again, the reminder of that the cry of the earth and the cry of the marginalized, it's all one. We can no longer address one without addressing the other. We have to listen to those in the margins, our brothers and sisters in the margins. I see, in looking at the goals, I noticed and I counted that 10 goals address the marginalized and 7 goals address the cry of the poor. So we can no longer look at the goals as individual goals, but they are interdependent. One depends on the other, and Sister Veronica alluded to this clearly. So today I have to say that more than ever, especially after listening to Sister Veronica, I am challenged in addressing the ills of our world. I am personally challenged to know what do I do and how do I do it. We heard that there is a slow implementation of the goals and there's a failure to address the structural problems. And of course, more than ever, a lack of political will in moving the goals forward. Sister Veronica is challenging me as an individual to respond, but not to respond individually as one person. My challenge for me is to find ways to work with others, to work collectively. Yes, I'm challenged individually, but that challenge comes with accountability. Who are the partners I want to partner with? Who is this collective group that I want to work with towards interconnectedness and mutuality, as you mentioned? I really like the term she mentioned, a global citizen. I consider myself a global citizen. I think all of us are global citizens. And it is because we're now interconnected because of technology, especially now with Zoom. Look at us at this meeting now. We have people from all over the different various countries, various places in the US. We're all called to address. We're all being challenged, I should say, to work together, to find ways to see how our brothers and sisters, the marginalized in other countries, can have hope in their lives. We need to respond to their needs and we need to make a difference, but we all have to do it collectively. But then I ask myself, how do I do this? I take it into heart that we are urged to listen, to hear our brothers and sisters, to listen to the cry of the earth. I have to share this story. As I mentioned, I'm an immigrant. I arrived in the US when I was 11 years old. Like many immigrants, I said the majority, they're pushed and forced out of their home country, out of their space where they feel comfortable, where they have their families, where they have their friends. As a kid, where I had my friends, I used to, my house was a little tiny place by a creek. And I always bring this story because it puts me in a place where I was surrounded by nature. We had no toys, but we always go down to the creek and play in the water, you know, chase the butterflies, listen to the birds. And we used to bathe in that water. It was a clean creek. My mom would go and I would go do our wash there. That was back in the 60s and 70s, of course. So that reminds me that recently when I went, that creek is no longer there. There's no water. There are no butterflies. There are no birds. It's all sealed up. Why? Because it's contaminated. To me, personally, that's the cry of the earth. To me, personally, that's my challenge. I take it as a challenge to see what I can do. I think all of us have stories. I think all of us can relate somehow how we are connected to nature and how that has changed for us. And now that we're at this time where we see so much destruction of our common home. But I see it not as I see this as an opportunity, not as a way to feel hopelessness. So I like to say that in taking the first step, I invite all of us to see and hear and also share stories and advocate for others to do what they need to do to partner with others to work together to address the ills and address the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria Elena, and thank you for sharing your personal story of your experience of your roots in Mexico. I think we very often forget about what immigrants leave behind when they decide to migrate to other countries, and especially those who migrate to the United States. So thank you very much. Our next responder is Barbara Casserly. Barbara first met us as the representative from Catholic Relief Services in our area, a woman who's really a global citizen as well, very committed to the needs of the marginalized. And I think especially for people who are living in developing nations. And she has worked with us both in our area and on institute level in terms of bringing the needs of others to our forefront and challenging us to free resources in order to help others. So I'm grateful to Barbara for responding positively to share her insights and her comments, her reflections from her reading of what Veronica has shared with us this day. Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here today and so inspiring to hear Sister Veronica's message, reminding us about the unseen by bringing particular stories to our attention. What resonated most with me was at the end when she talked about see, judge, and act. I know that in my story, it is that when you're able to see, judge how you're going to respond, and act and make a decision about acting with other players where you can make an impact, that just really resonated. I know some years ago, I live in Orange County here in Southern California, and a little south of us, there were some migrant buses that were surrounded by angry crowds of people. And it was ugly, and we are better than that. And it made me personally think about those people, our brothers and sisters, and how we should react to them. And of course, that's a huge part of the SDGs and improving the outcomes by 2030. So one of the ways that we can respond locally here in Los Angeles, I didn't really realize this until this opportunity came up, but there's an office in the city of Los Angeles that works on the Sustainable Development Goals. And there are academic institutions that are partnering with them. And there's an event on March 4th at 4 o'clock at USC where I happen to have a child studying. And the name of it is State of Asylum 2021, How Immigration Policies Oppress Immigrant Communities. So by participating today and really thinking about how we might act, I think that might be my next step in terms of acting locally and in responding to how do we respond locally. So I am really appreciative of that, that thought. The second point that really resonated with me, that I hope never leaves, is the thought of those 3 empty seats in every discussion on climate change. We know that, you know, we can all do small things, and we see in our spheres of influence what we could potentially do. I work remotely right now. Do I really need to go back to working and commuting full time? And we're all impacted by the traffic and discussing those things. And using as a rationale for that, those 3 empty seats, the future generations, the non-humans, and the impact on the marginalized. We've seen that around the world. And then the one other thought that I had is we heard the story from Bruhande about the woman embroidering their pain and making crafts from that. And I thought about the fact that in recent years, Los Angeles has become a fair trade city, and continued to support that fair trade effort and to support our brothers and sisters around the world through fair trade. And I have a question, one final question, because I would love to hear more about the Interfaith Power and Light, if that was the name of the organization, because I think that would be one way after seeing this, we could act. And I didn't quite get the full name of it and want to be sure I know what that is. So
thank you, Barbara, and thank you for sharing your homework that you did. I have to say, I didn't know there was this office in Los Angeles that was dedicated to implementation of the SDGs. Our final responder is another person who does not need any introduction, our own Mary Janino. And I also believe Mary is truly a global citizen, and she is also an insightful good friend. So Mary, I ask you to share with us your thoughts.
Thank you. And first, I'd like to thank Veronica again for her wonderful, engaging presentation with us. She certainly is a global citizen, as Kathy said. There are 2 things that struck me. One was to decenter and to transcend. Since I had been back in the United States and throughout the pandemic, I've had an opportunity to reflect on perspective and worldview. And I know I carry with me the perception of the United States in the last 4 years. When I first went to Rome, you know, my response was, this is not who we are. These attitudes, behaviors, they're exceptions. They're not, you know, prevalent. But being back here, it's certainly been a rude awakening, and knowing that I have to accept, yes, indeed, this is who we are. That leads me to the introduction for our day, is to look at the section of our vision statement, to look through a different lens. And I think that the lens the SDGs invite us to look through, and that Veronica has highlighted, is one of global citizenship. The invitation to transcend personal, cultural, political, religious boundaries, and to see what is really happening in our world from this lens, what's happening to the earth, what's happening to its people, with the priority of the common good. And that was reinforced in the invitation to decenter and transcend. It's also an invitation to listen to the voices from below, which comes from our chapter document of 2007, I want to say. I could be wrong. And it's an invitation for, I think, us to move out of our comfort zones, to risk our well-being, to question what we've learned or been socialized to, and to acknowledge that there is systematic discrimination, systematic, marginalization, and a systematic way of how we approach human rights. So again, as both Maria Elena and Barbara mentioned, speaking in favor of those participants, remembering those who are poor and marginalized, remembering future generations and non-human life, making room at the table for another generation, identifying and mentoring new leaders and being willing to step aside so that these new leaders can emerge, seeing the interconnectedness of our life to non-human life, and acknowledging that the choices we make have an impact. They can invite people into inclusivity. They can respect the integrity of creation, destroy what is good in our earth, and really deprive people of their human dignity and their potential. What attracts me about the Sustainable Development Goals is that so many nations signed on to it and so many people were consulted. I firmly believe if we're going to move them forward, we have to do them with collaboration, cooperation, and partnerships across all systems. Government, academic, social, religious, all systems have to be participants in this endeavor. I appreciated Veronica linking the blueprint of the social development goals to Pope Francis's dream for a better future. So those are my initial thoughts and responses.
Thank you very much, Mary. And I think, one of your insights, that whole thing is we see from where we stand. And that I think as women religious, we're called to stand in different places. Mm-hmm. We're called to stand, in the 2013 General Chapter, our theme was the no place. And I think we're challenged to stand with those who are in the no place and to interconnect our lives with others so that we can really create a society of compassion, of solidarity, and hope.
And I also think that we have to seize those opportunities come our way to reveal God's tenderness, His passion, compassion, mercy, and appreciation for what is good, right, just, and beautiful. On the other hand, we might want to look at the fury of Jesus in the temple, mm-hmm. when He brings forth the inequities and injustices, because those do permeate our worlds and our systems.
Thank you for bringing that up, because sometimes I find myself angry with what I see going on, especially people who know me know that the previous administration in our government was very painful for me to see. So when I hear of Jesus and His own being disturbed by what was going on in His church, I take comfort from that. So I want to thank our three responders for your willingness to risk and in a short period of time to put together some wonderful intuitive insights for us. Now, Veronica, do you have any comments you'd like to make? I know Barbara had her question about the Interfaith Light group.
Yes, actually, I could put a link right into the chat for that, if that would be of interest to people. And just to mention that I first met someone from there at the time of the Paris Agreement, the meeting COP21 in Paris. And three of us were there in the, not in the formal part, but in the civil society part. And I was at an event and met someone, and there was great resonance, and we had wonderful conversations. Since then, I've received a lot of emails, but I think the website would be a good place to start. And I get the impression that they do a lot working with local communities, congregations, and churches. And so I'm happy to share that. Just another one or two comments. Thank you, Maria Elena and Barbara and Mary. I think you've had some very rich thoughts, and I think that I'm touched by your challenges. The urge to listen, I think, is extremely important. And the idea of partnership and working with others, I'm afraid I had more that I could have developed on that, and I was a little bit thrown by the technology. But I think that interfaith dimension, working with local groups, and it's wonderful to know in Los Angeles that you do have a local group that you can actually tie into as far as the sustainable development goals. So I'm grateful for those. I think you've given us excellent reminders in your comments about the 3 empty chairs, about the need for the inclusiveness, the looking at the structural issues. And I couldn't stress more than enough. I was going to say to you, Maria Elena, that I was just met for the first time physically after a long time of not meeting with the representative for the congregations of St. Joseph the other day. We work in so many groups together. And I think the more we develop, Caritas, I am frequently engaged with. So the more we can, CRS, no, sorry, Barbara, but the connections we can make through these groups are often very humbling and very supportive. I think that the interconnectedness, which again, you have highlighted, is so real right now. And I think at this time of vaccines, I'm very, very conscious that it was only the other day that the very first vaccines went to Africa from the international COVAX facility. So the more we can help to make a reality for all people of our world, especially those who are most marginalized, better. So I don't know if there is anything else. There is so much more that we could say, and I would be happy to share with you, if it is of any interest, the little videos that I did not show, and the slides in a way that you could look at them if you so wished. So I'd like to thank you for the invitation. I'm humbled by it, and I look forward to a day when we can actually talk in person. But I thank you, and I thank you for your witness, and I encourage you. One other word, Mexico. Mexico this year is a country that's going to be reviewed in the high-level political forum. So I want to invite you to be sensitive, and I will send information that I hear so you can feed your experience from Mexico into the realities on the ground, because your voice, your word means so much. So in the US, I would encourage you to put pressure on the United States to report, and there are so many ways that I know you are engaged locally. And I thank you for that as someone who is a foreigner, an alien, but grateful for your witness and your advocacy, hoping we can connect it ever more to be a stronger global voice. And thank you.